can pull that down. So in the mix, once I've got my levels right, I might bring my snare down a little bit. Okay, if I want, I could maybe put a compressor across the drum group with a little bit of gain reduction. I'm not going to fuss around with that now. And just fade that out again. Okay, so I've got my MIDI pattern all on one track, allowing me to program all of the notes on one track, so I can see the kick in relation to the snare and the hi-hats and all the rest of it. And then in my mixer, I can then process each type of drum separately, including sends and any other processing. I then route the outputs of all those different elements back through a stereo drum group, which gives me control over the overall level and allows me to process the drums together to get a more cohesive sound. Okay, so before I finish up, I'll show you how that looks inside a folder. So this is the session. Inside the session I have two sampler instruments. I made one before, and this is the one that we just created now. And then I also have, so they're my sampler instruments, and I also have folders which contain the samples that I've used. So if I pass this session on now, it'll work no matter where, no matter what computer you open it on, because the samples that are used in the session are inside the project folder here. There's a different way to share sampler instruments, which is fairly straightforward. Back in the EXS 24, we go into the edit page again, and we simply export sampler instrument and sample files. Give it a name, so I'm going to call it EXS tutorial sampler instrument, and I'm going to save this to my desktop this time to make it a bit more obvious where it goes. Okay, so that's been saved, and I can find that down here. Just put these in the middle for you. So this folder contains the audio samples that belong to the instrument, and this folder contains the actual instrument itself. So a good way to store these is to put that inside of one folder, and now I've got basically a sampler instrument that can be used in other projects on other computers. And before I finish up, I'll show you where you put these in order to use them in the EXS instrument in Logic. What you need to do is locate where your sample library is. Mine's on an external drive inside a sample libraries folder inside Logic, and it's called sampler instruments. The instruments go inside this folder. You can see here's the sampler instruments themselves, and the sample files, the audio that belongs to those instruments, is in the sample files folder. What I've done is I've created my own folder with all the instruments that I might use or that I've created in my project. So you create a folder of your own sampler instruments and put your instruments in there. So I've got a bunch of different ones that have the audio and the sampler instrument together. So I hope that that's made it a bit clearer and that you'll be able to have fun making sampler instruments and be able to share them without missing files. You should be able to use groups and multi-outputs to have the most control over your sampler instrument.